Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Before I get to the subject of this teleseminar, I would like to draw your attention to the information that you will find on the list of supplementary materials about the possibilities of experiencing holotropic breathwork. It would really be important if you have not had any experience of holotropic states of consciousness, if you can have that experience of holotropic breathwork. I think it would give you a completely new perspective. We find that it's very useful for people if they had the personal experience, that they can then relate the material of the teleseminar to what they experience themselves. People who have not had holotropic experiences frequently even don't believe that they are possible when they hear the descriptions. So if you take a holotropic breathwork workshop, this is usually done in groups. You would not only have the experience yourself, but also have the chance to observe other people in the process and also hear their sharing. So you get quite a broad perspective for non-ordinary states. So now I would like to go to the subject of this module. In the last two teleseminars, we saw that none of the maps developed in the history of depth psychology really in and of itself is adequate for psychonautics. And the same is definitely true for the current model used by psychiatry and psychology. That current model actually is more of a liability if you do inner work, because it would treat certain experiences that are not part of the current map as being pathology rather than being an integral part of the psyche. So in the last module, we went through in some details through the first domain of the new expanded cartography, which was the recollective biographical level of the unconscious and the individual unconscious of Freud. Now this is not a particular challenge, because this really is very, very similar to the map which is used currently in psychology and psychiatry. We just had to introduce several changes. The first was the recognition that the physical traumas are very important psychotraumas that can play an important role in the development of emotional and psychosomatic disorders. And they also play a very important role in healing, in therapy. The second one was the existence of the COEX systems. And the third one was that in holotropic states, we actually experience things in full age regression rather than just trying to remember or reconstruct them. So none of these changes require some kind of major revision of psychiatry. Could be easily incorporated. Now, this is not true about the two new domains, transbiographical domains, that we will explore in this module and then in the next module. So in this module, we will look at the perinatal level, which is a domain in the unconscious that carries or harbors the record of our biological birth. And when the regression, the age regression, reaches the perinatal level, the experiences come in four typical constellations of emotions and physical feelings. And each of those constellations also represent a certain selective opening into the collective unconscious, into the next transpersonal domain. So this is what we do today. We'll look at it in the form of images, which I think is the best way of somehow bringing that content of that unconscious to our attention. And then in the next module, we explore the theoretical implications of the inclusion of these perinatal domains into our conceptual model. So we'll start exploring the perinatal level in such a way that we use this scheme of 4 stages of the biological birth process. And I will describe the experiential patterns that are associated with reliving of each of these stages. I relate to them as basic perinatal matrices, or BPM for short. So the first perinatal matrix relates to the situation of the fetus still in the womb before the onset of the delivery. Now, there's a wide range of possibilities here. This could be pregnancy, which is a result of planning of the parents, loving expectation. The mother is physically healthy, is in emotionally good condition. So that reliving of that kind of state could be a very ecstatic experience, where you simply identify with the fetus inside of the womb. Now, this doesn't necessarily happen. There are deliveries which are a result of rape. They're a result of a one-night stand when both parents were drunk. This could be a situation where the marriage was broken during the pregnancy. The mother is abused, is in emotionally bad condition, could be physically unhealthy, or the pregnancy could be so unwelcome that there are attempts at abortion that the fetus survives. And finally, we have another possibility, which is that there is what's called RH, or rhesus factor incompatibility, which means that the mother is Rh negative, the father is Rh positive. This is what the child inherits, so that from the beginning, the fetus is being attacked immunologically by the mother, is treated as an invader. Now, whether this is a good pregnancy or not so good, come 9 months plus minus, and this is the onset of the delivery. First hormonal changes, which are then translated into mechanical contractions of the uterus. Now, the way the uterus is built, each contraction of the uterus compresses the arteries and interrupts the flow, the placentary circulation between the mother and the child, which means there's no supply of oxygen to the child during that contraction. There's no nourishment coming in, and there's no removal of metabolic products. A very, very unpleasant situation. And there's no resolution for it because the cervix is not open. They're just contractions of the uterus in a closed system. Now, with each contraction, the cervix is being pulled over the head. It's dilating, as it is called. And when it reaches the necessary size, then it's the transition to the third matrix, when the contractions continue with all the consequences. But the cervix is now open, so there is this laborious, if you excuse the pun, propulsion through the breast canal. Now, there are tremendous pressures here, collisions of energy, and also the suffocation and the pain generate a powerful energy, which has all the qualities of sexual energy. So let's see that people who are reliving this stage have a lot of sexual images. Now, this is one step beyond Freud. Freud surprised the world by showing that sexuality doesn't begin in puberty, that it begins already on the breast. Now, this showing that our first encounter with sexual energy was in a very challenging situation where we were inflicting pain on another organism was inflicting pain on us. We couldn't breathe. There were a lot of pressures and fear. So this kind of experience then can become the basis of the development of various sexual dysfunctions, deviations, aberrations, perversions, what Krafft-Ebing called the psychopathia sexualis. And then we have the situation of the completion of the delivery, head first or feet first. And then the umbilical cord is cut either instantly or when it stops pulsating. This depends on the philosophy of the obstetrician and also on the circumstances. And then from then on, the child exists as an anatomically independent individual, still biologically, emotionally dependent, of course. Now, each of these stages can be relived as a kind of replay, biological replay, but each of them is also associated with specific symbolism that makes a lot of sense in relation to the anatomy, physiology, biochemistry that I just described. So the first matrix, if it's a positive, undisturbed prenatal state, is experienced not only as being a fetus in a good womb, but also opens into the experience of being in the ocean or identifying with aquatic animals, with fish, with jellyfish, with dolphins, whales, and so on. Or it can open into a cosmic situation, experiencing ourselves in the cosmic space, very much like the astronauts on a spacewalk. It can also open into the collective archetypal unconscious in the Jungian sense, where we can experience images from paradises or heavens of cultures, even cultures that we don't intellectually know. And if there is a disturbance in the prenatal state, then it usually is experienced as a state of poisoning, as intoxication. There could be some images of some insidious sort of archetypal creatures, demonic kind of creatures, and so on. And if there is attempt at mechanical abortion, it can be experienced as a kind of apocalyptic, bloody situation. Now, the transition from 1 to 2 is experienced typically as a whirlpool, as a vortex that's swallowing us, that's engulfing us, or it can take the form of archetypal creatures like Leviathan or dragon. It can also take the form of an octopus or a giant spider. And then fully developed second matrix can be like being in the underworld, being in hell, being in a situation where there is suffering, emotional, physical suffering, and we lose connection to linear time. So we have the feeling that it will never end, it will never open, we will never get out of there. Very, very challenging situation for psychonauts. Then when the cervix opens, we go into the third matrix. Here we have powerful clashing energies. We can have images of battles, some kind of bloody encounters of gladiators, or people fighting men against men and so on, images of medieval battles. It can open into the collective unconscious, showing some of the worst aspects of human history. And then, as I mentioned before, there could be a lot of sexual images here showing sex in the worst possible way. This is not a situation of Romeo and Juliet walking hand in hand, having a beautiful emotional relationship, spiritual connection, walking in somewhere in the mountains, you know, there are creeks and buttercups, and they end up making love somewhere in the forest of birch trees. This will be showing the sex as it exists in the urban underworld, the atmosphere of red light districts, sex connected with pain, with crime, with abuse, with dirt, and so on. And then the transition from this third matrix to the fourth typically comes as a death rebirth experience. We can later talk about why it's not just rebirth, why it is death rebirth. And for many people, it also is represented as passing through fire. Then the fourth matrix is like emerging into light, which could be clear light, which could be golden light, it could be rainbow spectra, it could be peacock designs, it could be images of archetypal beings appearing in light, also images of beautiful landscape, particularly like landscape after a storm, which is sort of washed and green and reborn. Okay, so these are the perinatal matrices, and then I will take you through pictures which are illustrating this, and we will start by a series of wonderful drawings of a professional artist, Harriet Sharana Francis, who had a high-dose LSD session in the late 60s in Palo Alto when there was one of the official psychedelic programs. And she had amazing capacity to portray these images. And these were then published in a book which is called Drawing It Out, Befriending the Unconscious. And I worked with her on the preface to this book. I wasn't the one who was sitting for her. This was before I came to the United States, but it's definitely the best representation of a death rebirth journey. So I will first show you 2 pages of these drawings that you get a sense of the unfolding of the images. And then I will take one picture after another and say something about it. Much of it is what she told me as I was preparing the preface to her book. So this is the first picture where we see at the top geometrical patterns. This is something that was very, and still is very important, very common in lower dosage of psychedelic sessions, or at the beginning of higher dosages. If these were paintings rather than drawings, this would be very rich colors. This is where people talked about kaleidoscopic displays. They were talking about stained glass windows in Gothic cathedrals, or the arabesques, the decoration in Islamic mosques, and so on. Those of us who had these images, when we saw fractals, which are graphic representation of certain nonlinear equations, we said we saw fractals. There are videos of these fractals that you can see. Mandelbrot or Julian said they're showing really intricate geometrical patterns, and if you go to higher magnification or lower magnifications, the pattern repeats itself but with variations. And so now I believe that what we saw was not what we originally thought, which was the projection of the structure of the retina in the eye, but that we saw fractals. So here she sees these images, but as you can see, it's getting deeper. She now feels the oppression of her chest and has kind of anxious expectation. And this is the situation where the Newtonian reality is falling apart. As you can see, she doesn't like it. She's trying to stop it, but there's no good stopping of a powerful psychedelic session. She realizes that and surrenders, letting go. And then you can see now the vortex. She's being drawn into this vortex. And there is mandala of skulls and rib cages, indicating that this is going to be about death. She's drawn to an encounter with death. Actually, as you can see, in the underworld, the realm of the dead. So we can see bones and skulls, and she is experiencing pain, which is very characteristic for the birth experience. We see a little specimen of spider. They will see much better ones later. And now here she experiences very deep abysmal sense of loneliness, which is very characteristic for this. We'll talk in the next module about the fact that this kind of pattern underlies deep depression. People who feel alone, even if they're surrounded by loving people, or alone in a crowd. This is another element, pressure. When she experienced this pressure, she experienced herself under a gigantic boulder that had the features of her mother. And initially it was like a symbolic representation of the oppression that she experienced in childhood and also from her husband. And then on a deepest level, she realized that there was actually a situation where the organism of the mother was crushing her. So the birth is a very human situation, involves human anatomy, but it's also a mechanical element, the pressures, the twists, the torques, and so on. Now, this shows how on the perinatal level, birth and death are two sides of the same coin. The lower part is death, the skulls, the bones. The upper part is more like being born, trying to get out of there. So on the perinatal level, birth and death are deeply interconnected. And here we can see the spiritual element, the numinosity coming into the picture. We have symbols of death, the bones, changing into spiritual symbols, an altar, a crucifix, and then the rune-like spiritual symbols. This shows how on the perinatal level, the obstetric, the anatomical element is all mixed with the archetypal element. This is a manual help which she got during birth, but she's experiencing it as being rescued from the underworld by a demigod. And this is a typical sequence of annihilation, death, ego death, and rebirth that we discussed in the module when we talked about shamanism. Shaman's experience of annihilation and then the magical journey to the supernal realm. And then here's a death rebirth. It's a stylized identification with Jesus, when death and resurrection is our cultural archetype for death and rebirth. But this could come from any other culture. This could be related to Isis, Osiris. This could be related to Dionysus. It could be related to Attis, Adonis, and so on. And here, this is a symbolic representation that now the inner transformation is finished and there is a closure. There were no stitches involved in her birth, so this is a symbolic representation. And now coming out, you can see it's coming out with the vision of a peacock that cross-culturally is a symbol of death and resurrection, immortality, the star-filled sky, and so on. We see it in alchemy, the cauda pavonis, the peacock tail. This would be also an experience of meeting not only one's own mother, but in a kind of higher octave, the great mother archetype. And many of the great mother goddesses have the peacock as the symbol, like Hera, Juno, Saraswati, and so on. And now something interesting, after being born, emerging from the birth canal, now she is in a very womb-like amniotic kind of experience, oceanic experience, identifying with various aquatic creatures. And this is then coming down. The emphasis is on being firmly grounded, connected to the earth, but the head is in heavens, and there are symbols of birth, this representing spiritual rebirth, spiritual liberation. Now we now go to a number of images of different people, and we'll follow the order of these matrices, the way they would unfold in biological birth. But this is not necessarily the way it would happen in your own inner process. There you can experience any sequence, any combination of the matrices. And we'll later talk about the fact that this actually seems to be correlated with planetary transits. The way Rick Tarnas has written beautifully about. So this is now the first matrix. And we'll first look at the beautiful, at the undisturbed prenatal states. So this is being a fetus inside of the womb, but also being in the cosmos, in a galaxy. And as you can see, the galaxy has the shape of a breast. There is a connection between the unity with the fetus in the womb and the unity during nursing on the breast. Both situations are symbiotic fusion between the mother and the child, and they're mediated by a liquid. This is the blood on the prenatal level and the milk on the breast. And we have it in the language. Gala means milk in the Greek language, and lak means milk in the Latin language. So galaxy means Milky Way. So we have a Milky Way that has a form of the breast here. This is another similar kind of a representation by another person. Here we have a situation where the fetal state and a good womb is opening into an oceanic state, becoming an aquatic creature, identifying with dolphins, with jellyfish, with whales, and so on. And this is, again, being in a good womb and identifying with what Jung would call the divine child archetype. So like Krishna or Jesus were children, but they were divine. It's a very important archetype. And this one has it all. This is a fetus in the aquatic environment with aquatic creatures, but the whole thing is also like an orbiting satellite, the fetal, the oceanic, and the cosmic, all Neptunian images. We'll all later talk about this connection between the matrices and the archetypal symbols. So, in that, as we find them in astrology. So the first matrix would be very Neptunian, dissolution of boundaries, mystical union, and so on. Now, this is a disturbance in the womb. In this situation, it's toxic, where we can see something like a demonic kitchen. The fetus is being poisoned and is identifying with creatures in a similar predicament, with a chicken in a very advanced stage of embryogenesis, and then fish in polluted waters. And this is an aggressive womb. I talk about, for example, the RH incompatibility, where the womb is actually attacking the fetus. Now, we would see this as simply a biochemical situation. This is about antibodies and so on. But when you experience, you see that this doesn't stand on its own, that it's informed from another level, from the archetypal level. So you can see the archetypal creatures that somehow on this level are then translated into chemical insults. This is a really bad womb, as you can see. And this is a womb where there was not enough nourishment. She called this always hungry. And this is from the same woman, where you can see the always hungry is also then happening on the level of nursing of the breast. So we see the opposite of what we saw before, a good womb and a good breast, the oceanic, the cosmic situation. And then here we see the bad prenatal situation and very defective nursing. And this is a pregnancy that doesn't have enough energy. This was represented as the womb is represented as a electric bulb. And as you see, there's no energy, there's no electricity coming into it. So this is a womb that doesn't have enough elan vital, doesn't have enough life energy, doesn't have enough entelechy. Now we go to the second matrix, where we see the contraction coming from all sides and there is no way out. Now this is the first picture by Hans Ruedi Giger. I am using his images in my last book when I'm showing the importance of the perinatal level for the understanding of art. He was an amazing Swiss fantastic realist. And this is his experience when in his inner exploration, he reached the level of the womb inside of the uterus. He called this uterine landscape 1. And here, this uterine landscape 2, where he added crosses. He made it actually like a cemetery inside of the womb. And when I showed this in Switzerland, the men who were present in the audience told me that this is also the shape of the targets that the Swiss army is using for shooting practice. So he got there the uterus, which is birth, sex, and then the cross is death, and then also violence. Very interesting way of working with images. And these are some of the paintings that he was painting, that he was drawing from his own experience of birth. This is he and his wife, Carmen, and behind him you can see the size of these images that he was painting. They're so gigantic. This was our visit in the Giger house in Oerlikon. On the left side, this is Rick Tarnas, brilliant astrologer that I already mentioned, then Carmen, and then myself and Hans Ruedi. And this is inside of the house. It looks very much like the second matrix. There were no windows, or the windows were covered by curtains, and it was crowded, full of these heavy-duty perinatal images. And as a child, he experienced a ghost ride in a kind of annual mart. And then as an adult, because he was very impressed by it, as an adult, he created this little railroad in his garden going through his house, actually. And it was like a perinatal show, like a ghost ride using perinatal images. So these are the kinds of things that you saw from that train. Tunnels, of course, and kind of a demonic women. There was a, I think about 3 meter long stuffed real crocodile. And this was, we did a training module in his museum in Gruyere, which is a wonderful small town in Switzerland that the cheese fondue comes from. And the 2 remaining persons are Alex Gray and Alison Gray, wonderful visionary artists who focus more on the glorious, on the beautiful, transcendental aspect of the unconscious, that as you encounter it in psychonautics. And this is Hans Ruedi in one of his better days. Now here we can see an image of the beginning, second matrix, the whirlpool, the vortex, again, allusion to death, very much like in what we saw in Harriet Francis's painting. This could remind you of Edgar Allan Poe's terrifying story, which is about the maelstrom that caught 3 Norwegian fishermen who were brothers, and 2 of them died, and one of them managed to rescue himself from the maelstrom. Images of swallowing, I already mentioned. Here we have also again reference to death in the skull, the reference to the archetype of the world tree, which is also projected into the placenta, and then the images of snakes. Snakes, unlike in Freud, where they are always phallic symbols, are also very powerful images on the perinatal level. The viper type of snake as a symbol of the imminent death, but also initiation. In Pompeii, in the Villa dei Misteri, there are beautiful frescoes representing the Dionysian ritual, and it begins by a bite of the snake on the forehead. And then, of course, the python is a very powerful perinatal image because it swallows the prey and looks pregnant, but also twists the body around the prey and crashes. It is again swallowing, and as you can see, the attack that's coming from the outside is also turning this woman into kind of a demon. That suffering in the womb generates enormous amount of aggressive response. There is a tremendous pocket of aggression on the perinatal level that we'll talk about in the next module. And this is more Giger. These are very frail fetuses, but they're put into a situation which is way above their head. So it sees them as these pitiful kind of Indian warriors with submachine guns and grenades. And this is Hans Ruedi Giger's self-portrait for his exhibition. Again, he was very, very much aware that he was stepping his own trauma of birth. He said that he probably would be crazy if he didn't have this amazing outlet in his art. This is a picture that is representing the mother and the child who are caught in the second matrix in a situation when they are hurting each other, and they have no escape of that from that situation until the cervix opens, when the second stage changes into the third stage. And this is how Giger portrayed birth, having a very mechanical element in it. His art was called biomechanoid, because we combined human anatomy with machines that are hard, that can kill you, that can hurt you, and so on. So these are his kind of typical images that are called like the death delivering machine, birth machine, and so on. And here we can see again the second matrix in connection with the snake, as we saw it before. And now we have the spiders. There is a logic to the use of the spider. We talked about the first matrix having also the cosmic aspect of the freedom, spatial freedom, as well as the oceanic freedom. So something like the spider would be a very logical termination of the spatial freedom. If you were a butterfly or a fly, the whole world seems to belong to you until you fly into a spider web, and then you get sort of attacked, you get constricted, and your life is threatened. So this is one from Heido's psychedelic session. This is a spider from our holotropic breathwork training. This is also from the holotropic breathwork training. And I would ask you if you can really remember this picture, because we will see a resolution of this at the end. And this is another one from a high dose LSD session. As you can see, very, very similar images. Spider as a symbol of the devouring mother and the termination of what feels like a cosmic freedom being in the womb. Again, this was called the mother demon, a child being hurt by the contractions of the mother. This is not from self-exploration. This is not psychonautics. This is an art that was done on a death row. On the internet, I found paintings that were painted by people who knew that they would die in the next few days. So this is one of them. You can see the upper part as this very logical. He's in a prison. There are bars, there's a lock, and so on. But if you look at the lower part, here he's using somehow the image, typical image from the second matrix, for his idea about what death will be like. So we are afraid of death not because we know that we would die, relating to something that might happen in the future. If we are afraid of death, we are drawing on our memory of situations where our life was threatened, and birth certainly is an important source of that. So this is the second picture of the same person. There you can see actually the spider itself is now coming as the symbol of death. Now this is the female reproductive organ in the process of delivering, where it feels like a prison, like a torture chamber, like a gigantic press. And this is Giger's picture. I mentioned that there was an annual mart in the town where he lived, where he saw the ghost ride. They also had a machine that men could hit, and something was flying into the air where they could measure their strength. And in his adult fantasy, artistic fantasy, it then was changed into this vaginal guillotine. You know that Freud had this idea of vagina dentata, the idea that children had this silly fantasy that the vagina can kill them, that it can castrate them, and so on. And he saw it as a silly fantasy of children. Now, if we realize that there is a record of what we experience in connection with this organ when we were being born, then the image of the dangerous vagina is not really silly at all. Children can die during delivery, mothers can die, and so on. Now, this is another representation of the attack during the second matrix, the termination of the oceanic bliss of the womb, where it experiences something like an octopus that comes and sort of attacks us in the state of this oceanic freedom, and then we experience suffocation and constriction. Here it's a fight with a python that symbolizes birth. And this shows that many people find that the pain experienced at birth is somehow a source of guilt, that the fact that we suffered so much, that so much pain was inflicted on us, that on a deep level we perceive it as punishment for something that we must have done, even if we don't remember what it was. So if you verbalize guilt, it's something, I must have done something terrible, but I don't really know what. So this is the last second matrix. Now we're moving to the third matrix. You can see the contractions of the uterus are represented as sort of archetypal predatory birds, but the situation is not completely hopeless. It's not constricted. There is a possibility, however small, of getting out of there. So there's an opening, there's hope coming into the picture. Now, this is a very beautiful representation of a turning point in depression. In his book, Mourning and Melancholia, Freud described depression as an aggression that's turned inside, turns against us. The extreme of aggression is murder. The extreme of depression is also murder. We kill ourselves. So here we can see the two matrices juxtaposed. The middle part is the totally contained situation of the second matrix. And here we can see that in the third matrix, some of the energy now is released, it becomes available for discharge. And we see this as a major turning point in depression, where people get access to aggression, which up to that point has been pent up, has been sort of held in the organism. This is another Giger. We can see atmosphere of war, the helmets. We can see the aggression, the fangs. We can see death again, the skulls, and then the sexuality also. There's no other situation that can bring these logically together than the perinatal level. Another one here, the boa constrictor loops representing the crushing. Then we certainly feel attacked. There's aggression there. There is again the crusher of the body of the woman with the hand. There is you feel attacked. There are these kind of grotesque, demonic kind of creatures, and there is a sexual element in the naked woman, and also spiritual element in this allusion to crucifixion. And this is just another version where the crucifixion is more explicitly represented. So these are the kind of images that we would see as blasphemy. Blasphemy, blasphemic images can come when we are emerging out of the third matrix into the fourth, when it's still dealing with aggression, with sexuality, with violence, and so on. But we are now approaching the spiritual opening, and there can be a situation where these get mixed, where you have spiritual images, but they are distorted or mocked. This is his representation of Kali, of the devouring mother goddess. And we can see that he combines it with a sharp, sort of mechanical objects again, something that can hurt us. And this, again, is a Kali-esque figure, the image of Baphomet, which is the demonic creature in the form of a goat. And then we can see under the image of Kali, we can see the head, which is being crushed in a vice. And then we can see the skeletal hairdo on the left side, and a very strange kind of paradoxical, ironical image of the fetus is represented as condoms, something that should have been a real antithesis of their life, something that when it functions, it should prevent the very existence. So death and birth represented in these funny condom images of the fetuses. And this is Baphomet, which is the figure from the history of the Templars that Giger was very fond of. Again, at the bottom, we have references to death. We have the two fetuses here that before had the steel bands on their head. We can see the boa constrictor loops at the top. We can see in the middle a naked woman sitting on his trident. The trident is simultaneously mons pubic, the pubic area of the woman. So again, birth, sex, death combined, and on the left side, on the horizontal there, we can see reds, very scatological images. So there's an aspect to the third matrix which I call scatological. Scatos means dung or dirt. So it's the encounter with biological materials that can occur during birth. And this is an image of a Sabbath of the witches that again combines those elements which we can experience in the context of the third matrix: birth, sex, death, blasphemy, and so on. So very frequently people who are going through this third matrix can see archetypal images of the Walpurgis night, or the Sabbath of the witches. And this is another archetype from that same psychological place. This is the Black Mass ritual. This is a painting, modern painting, French painting, which is called Mon Tombeau, My Tomb. And we can see the same kind of mixture of elements. So on the right side, we can see a tomb with a vaginal opening. So birth, sex, death. Then above is a woman naked lying on a tomb which says Masoch. This is the tomb of Leopold Masoch, who gave the name to Masochism. Then if we go to the left, we see a naked woman playing with her breast in a coffin. Again, sex and death mixed. On the other side, there is a woman embracing a phallic tombstone. Then we see images of violence. We can see the whips, the severed head. And then again, blasphemy. Jesus almost like in a primal scream at the top there. And then the naked, frivolous nuns. And the ultimate blasphemy, we can see the monstrance where you keep the Eucharist. This is the ultimate sacrament in Christianity, planted in this night vase that's being used at night to go to the bathroom. And then above we can see also the storm, the electric storm, which is a typical symbol that comes in connection with the death rebirth experience, the connection with the heaven, between earth and heaven. Now this is an octopus, but different octopus than before. In the second matrix, the octopus was strangling and killing. This is more like a bondage situation, entanglement, but has very kind of a sexual, sensual quality to it. The original here is the classical painter Hokusai, and this was brought to me by one of my patients. She said, this is exactly what I experienced, and I then found it on Hokusai's picture. This is Giger's picture from a collection which was called Erotomechanics, showing very brutal representation, very mechanical representation of sexuality, which is characteristic for the third matrix, as I already described it. Now, this is from one of my patients in Prague. She called this a flagellant. This is a representation of the experience of the third matrix, where the experience is kind of off the scale. The person cannot say whether this is ecstasy or whether it is ultimate agony. This patient told me, I didn't know if it was a cosmic orgasm or a galactic vivisection. And she called this picture flagellant, which were the members of a sect that was, people were torturing themselves and torturing each other, and then experiencing first sexual arousal and then transcendence into a spiritual experience. So you are supposed to be able to see this picture as related to pain, where it's torn flesh and blood, but also a different perspective when you see it as a beautiful pattern on a Persian rug. This is birth as a shamanic journey through the underworld. There's that connection, as we already saw in shamanism, and we again see in the next module. And this is the painful connection between the penis and the umbilical cord. I mentioned Freud's idea of the vagina dentata. He has another one, which he's known for, which is the castration complex, that he attributes to the loss of the penis. Now, in the work with holotropic states, you find that behind it is a coex system where the deeper level is the cutting of the umbilical cord. So again, we'll talk about the fact that you can understand what Freud described as castration complex as on a deeper level being related to cutting of the umbilical cord. And this is one of the pictures where Giger is sort of coming close to transcendence. This was for the Harkonnen Castle, for the movie called Dune. And you can see like a staircase that seems to be going to heaven, but there is this danger of being killed, being hurt. And again, the masterful morphing of sexual symbols, phallic symbols, into symbols of death, bones. Now, this is, again, the snake element that we described as typical for the second matrix, but this time it's not a closed snake pit, as it would have been in the second matrix, but there is a possibility of escaping from there. Very much like in the Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indiana Jones and his girlfriend are locked by the Nazis in this crypt in Egypt, and they are trying to escape from there are snakes all over the place, and then the mummies falling on them as symbols of death, and then they get to the opening into the Egyptian sun. This is also similar. The upper part is the painful elements, the dangerous elements in the unconscious, but now opening to a new positive area, which this patient represented as a growing embryo and as a sprouting seed. And there are the colors representing transcendence: blue, white, and here she didn't have gold, so the yellow represents gold. This is the experience of the opening at birth, where the lower part was called the swamp or the quagmire of my unconscious, with all kinds of dangerous animals. The upper part is the breakthrough, the opening into the cosmos. And the animals at the interface become friendly, supportive animals. And she represented herself as a princess, which was tremendous progress, considering her self-image when she was going into therapy. The coronation is a very typical symbol of rebirth. So is the halo as the symbol of the twice born. And now we have images of the fourth matrix coming out, the death rebirth experience, the opening into light. If there was not heavy anesthesia, that some of course would not give you the clear transition, and the birth would then be more like awakening from a hangover. So this is from the holotropic breathwork. This was called Journey through a Mother Dragon. You can see something very interesting. There are two characters going through this. One is an adult, one is a child. This represents the situation in a therapeutic situation like holotropic breathwork psychedelic session, where as an adult you have an experience of holotropic state that involves age regression, and you go back and you become again the infant who was challenged by birth. And the fact that you can now cope with it, which was impossible for you as a child, is that not only is the situation radically different, you have support, but you are now supported by your adult self. You have different understanding of the situation, you have different stamina. So this seems like the rebirth is possible because now we are drawing on the reserves of the stamina of the adult. This is the same person. Journey through Mother Dragon. We can see on the right side the two persons coming out, the child and the mother. Now, with the emergence of the from the birth canal is frequently represented as going through a carnival situation. Now, imagine that you had the encounter with the perinatal matrices that were so real, so realistic, that it seemed like you might die. And now you get to a situation where you realize that you have made it, that this was just a symbolic experience and it will not hurt you, but you still have to deal with some leftovers of death. So you emerge in this situation where the general flavor is liberation, emotional liberation, liberation of sexual energies and energy in general, but there are still images of death in like in Mardi Gras or in Rio de Janeiro. So you're in a situation where there are symbols of death, but they are there in the context of celebration, not something that you are afraid of. Now this is the last moment of birth as climbing a mountain. Is very, very characteristic. So there's these attacks of the uterine contractions as a predatory birth, but she's climbing up and reaching to the light. Being in the second matrix or going into the second matrix feels always like going in, no matter what your position is. Once you get to the third matrix, it feels like going out and up, climbing, and then emerging into light. Now, I mentioned the element of fire that frequently marks the transition from 3 to 4. So this is the last moment before being born, passing through fire. There could be past life experiences of being burnt at a stake or being burnt in a house. And this one is specifically the last moment before being born. This patient said she would be here in a horizontal position. The triangle is the place where the vortex of the head is breaking through. The external world would be behind the screen. And the oranges, the reds, and the yellows represent the explosive energy that goes into this last moment, where he might have the feeling that our head will explode, that the whole world will explode. And maybe that atomic war started. Somebody pushed the button and previously contained energies are now going haywire in a dangerous way. So both the going into the birth feels like threatening, but also coming out from the contained situation into complete liberation, a state with no boundaries, is also very scary. It involves the ego death, the sense of complete annihilation. Now this is, again, the last moment before being born. There is an image of Kali, but not Kali, who is part of the Hindu pantheon, you know, with Shiva and Ganesh and so on. This is the tantric Mahakali, where we have only two protagonists: the Shiva Shava, represented as corpse, and the dynamic force, which is the Mahakali. And here she is represented as holding as a shashlik what in Hindu mythology is the support of the universe. The universe is resting on a turtle and then 8 elephants, and she has them here on the spit, you know, the spear. She's the boss. She's running the show. So there is now the head of the child, of the newborn, coming out of the vagina, actually tasting as at the same time that the vaginal blood from the mother, and then in the upper red corner, color of the blood and the vaginal opening. This is the complete surrender of the male and the male pride, the surrender to the great mother goddess. This is a similar picture by Giger, one of the very colorful ones. This is called Victory, and he gave a little caption to it. He said, "This is what the mother must look like to the child, to the newborn child, when he or she emerges from the birth canal." The horrifying journey through the birth canal. This is another destructive deity that can appear in this context. This is Moloch, who was the deity worshipped in ancient Carthage, and then also in ancient Israel. This is described in the Old Testament. They made a sculpture of Moloch, which was hollow, metallic sculpture, and they made fire inside of Moloch's belly, and they sacrificed newborn children. So this is a symbol of the destruction, the sacrifice of the newborn, and emergence in fire. And the next picture is the resolution of the situation, where we can see the body still in flames, but the head is now emerging into a heaven of a dark-skinned, goddess that is associated with peacock, the peacock heaven. There are goddesses like that, for example, Saraswati. Another powerful image here, and death in fire and rebirth, is the symbol of the phoenix, a bird who lived for 500 years in Arabia, and then built a nest and laid an egg, and then the sun would set the nest ablaze, and the heat of the sun hatches the egg. The new phoenix is born while the old one is dying in fire. So this is a symbol of cyclical rebirth, immortality through cyclical rebirth. This is from the Italian holotropic breathwork training. This one called dismembramento, dismemberment, again a typical shamanic archetype of the death rebirth experience. This is again experience of death rebirth in a shamanic context as being torn to pieces by a pack of wolves. In the shamanic culture, there are certain animals which are seen as initiatory animals. So as you experience death rebirth, you experience it as being devoured by a specific animal. Here it is wolf, it could be a polar bear, it could be brown bear, grizzly, it could be jaguar in South America, it could be snake as in the Australian Aboriginal culture and so on. Again, death rebirth experienced at Esalen in the big house when there was a beautiful view of the ocean. So this was the death rebirth experience, and an important role it was played by a swan. And this woman didn't know that the swan is a powerful shamanic bird in Siberian shamanic mythology. And here is the promised resolution of that situation that I draw your attention to with the spider and the mummy. She is now escaping from the realm of the devouring mother goddess, the spider goddess, and she is preparing for rebirth, but for her it's not climbing, it's actually falling, accepting a fall. She had a pretty serious phobia of heights. Now, as she was reliving the birth at the final stages, suddenly there was this memory which emerged. She was born in Prague, although she lives in the Northwest United States. She was born in Prague, and when she was a child, we were liberated by the Red Army, and for some time the soldiers lived in people's homes. And as she was a child, they were playing with her and throwing her, not quite sensitively, very high and catching her. This was the one layer of her coex that underlay the phobia of heights. And here we can see she's has a promise of transcendence, but she's still hanging on. She hasn't allowed herself to experience the letting go into something that felt like a fall. It's a very interesting experience that some people have in connection with birth. It might have something to do with the fact that we are encountering gravity for the first time. It could be phylogenetic. There are animals who deliver standing, so the birth is a drop like in a giraffe. Women in Sudan and other places deliver standing. So that experience of falling is characteristic for the transition between the third and the fourth matrix. The dangerous sports, the extreme sports, bungee cord jumping or dangerous driving and so on, those are all motivated by that transition from 3 to 4. And this is her resolution when, as you can see, she is falling apart. So this again, the dismemberment that we heard about in relation to shamanism. So the old body is falling apart, a new self is emerging, and the self has a spiritual connection to the divine light, and below her it says liberation. This is a psilocybin session. It's the new life coming out of old life, and there's a play on words in English because the flower here is carnation, so it's reincarnation. And this is a wonderful picture from the holotropic breathwork training, giving birth to oneself. So many women who are reliving their own birth are also experiencing themselves as delivering, whether or not they actually had the personal experience of giving birth to a child. And then the situation gets resolved by experiencing being born out of oneself, giving birth to oneself. So this is what is beautifully captured here. Another rebirth situation below is a cemetery casket, symbols of death, and she is rising up and merging with the divine light. This is Giger's experience of the crucifixion in the context of a death rebirth process. And this is from a holotropic breathwork session, reliving birth and experiencing manual help at a time when she was identifying with Jesus on the cross. This is another version of the last moment before birth. Here the tension is not experienced as the explosive energies, red, orange, yellow as we saw it, but in a mechanical way as a wire that's pulling it apart. There is the fire that we talked about. There is the heart. The rebirth is in Kundalini Yoga the shift from the low chakras to the heart chakra, spiritual birth. The arms are reaching for the divine light. Then below we can see the old kind of dismal areas in the unconscious, and then in the middle we have a symbol of the fourth matrix, which is a combination of the peacock and the vaginal designs. So this is the continuation of that experience. Well, this is turning into this peacock aureole. And then finally emerging from the birth canal. Here we have the fire, we have the combination of vaginal peacock elements in the vagina that's delivering her own vagina, and then also the same symbols on the nails of the hands, which were described as nourishing, supportive hands. And behind these, or below the hands, we can see star-spangled sky, which we saw as the symbol of the first matrix. So here we can see the upper part as the fourth matrix, and then the transition from there into the first matrix. The same sequence that we saw in Harriet Francis, only she went from the connection with the peacock into the oceanic aspect of the first matrix. This is going from the fourth matrix into the cosmic representation of the first matrix. Another symbol of peacock, it's a death rebirth symbolism. This was a vision of a skull representing death, and then exploded at the moment of death rebirth and turned into these beautiful patterns on a peacock tail. This was called breakthrough, which is kind of self-explanatory. Another opening into the cosmos. We can see how increasingly the fourth matrix starts resembling the first. The first matrix is coming into heaven, coming into paradise. The first matrix is losing the sense of linear time, so you are being there and it feels like you are going to stay there forever. You know that like in Christian religion, both hell and heaven are experienced as something that's going to happen, be happening for eternity. Now, eternity, if it's understood experientially, is nothing to do with linear time. It's not a continuation of an order, which is like 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. The eternity means experiencing the sense of timelessness behind linear time. It also living in the present, that is emphasized in spiritual systems. Doesn't mean sandwiching yourself between the past and the present, but experiencing the present moment as if it were timeless. Now, as we emerge, we saw in Harriet Francis that she was emerging, and what happened to her? She was experiencing her own mother. The higher octave of this could be meeting the great Mother Goddess. So this was the encounter with the Great Mother Goddess after the experience of being born, reborn. The Great Mother Goddess giving life to everything in nature. This was the experience of Gaia, the goddess of our earth. Another beautiful image from a holotropic breathwork session of the Great Mother Goddess with the symbols of rebirth, which means the rainbow, and then also the star-filled sky representing the timelessness of the first matrix. This is a Caesarean birth, where of course we don't have the struggle through the birth canal, when we feel more like the opening, and the unpleasant part is that we feel somehow as if it were a rape, we were sort of extracted out of it without any transition. This was a painting by Jane English, who wrote a book about her Caesarean birth, which was called A Different Doorway, with the subtitle Adventures of a Caesarean Born, which I really recommend for those of you who are interested in Caesarean birth and the differences between vaginal birth and Caesarean birth. And this was an experience of a male patient in Prague who was now again approaching the divine light, but there is this menacing figure that prevents that. And it turned out to be the experience of the ego death, of annihilation that he had to experience before the way into the light was free, as we see it in the next picture, actually facing the cosmic sun, the divine light. And then I have 4 more pictures which don't come from self-exploration, but it was a gift from a Danish artist. I had given many years ago a talk about perinatal matrices, and she was at that lecture and then came back to another lecture of mine 2 years later, and she gave me these 4 paintings as her own rendition of the 4 perinatal matrices. So we see there that you can use that same archetypal sequence for many other situations, for the development of a bird inside of the egg. We can also see it for the development of a culture from a very harmonious situation, then advent of a totalitarian system which sort of closes the country the way it happened in communist Russia and the Eastern European countries. And then the third matrix will be symbol of revolution. You know, enough of the oppression. We'll now live freely. We'll be able to breathe freely. There's a lot of discussion of freedom of breath in revolutions. And then the fourth matrix is the victory of the revolution or end of the war. I made the references to these religious images. We started with the heaven and paradise in connection with the first matrix, then the hellish experience of the second matrix, no exit with a sense of linear time. Then the third matrix would be the image of purgatory, when there is suffering, but with perspective. If we suffer enough, things get better. And then the transition from 3 to 4 would be the second birth, the divine epiphany. And in the language of archetypal astrology, the first matrix would be Neptunian, the second would be Saturnian, the third one is Uranian, the breakthrough, and the fourth is the third would be Plutonian, and the fourth would be Uranian, the breakthrough. This is the Danish artist's second matrix. This is the third matrix, and this is the fourth matrix. And then I have those two last pictures. This is something that I got in Moscow when I was having my 70th birthday. I was giving a keynote in the European Conference of Psychotherapy. And in the evening, there was a banquet. There was a lot of drinking, and there were people from our breathwork training from Ukraine. And one of them got up and made a toast to me and said, but Stan, you know, you talk about these perinatal matrices, but where we come from, the babies are not born from vaginas, they are born from cabbages. So this is the picture that I got as my present to my 70th birthday. And I have the last picture, which is when George Bush asked quite seriously that the teachers dedicate the same time in their classrooms to the creationist theory as to the theory of evolution. This form of creationist theory that he asked for was a theory that was based on counting the lengths of lives in the Bible, like this one lived 800 years, this one lived 900 years, and so on, and came up with the figure 6,000 years. So this theory was that the universe was created 6,000 years ago on one day, the serious request from an American president. And so the San Francisco Chronicle brought this cartoon showing Bush as a teacher in a class, pointing to a stork bringing the baby, and he says, and according to another theory of human reproduction. So thank you for your attention. I know this was the marathon, but I think you got a good sense of the images on the perinatal level. And then in the next module, we will talk about the major implications that this inclusion of perinatal level has for understanding emotional, psychosomatic problems, how it brings new understanding of human violence and wars and revolutions, brings new understanding of religion, mysticism, spirituality, and also new understanding of art. So thank you very much for your attention.